How to cultivate your power without violence or domination. Three principles for dealing with uncooperative parties. The first, you cannot control another person's behavior. Two, the only behavior over which you have direct control is your own. Three, you can indirectly influence another by controlling how you respond to that person. Let's deal with the first principle first. You cannot control another person's behavior. Short of using force, you can't control another person. They'll always have their agenda. Using force to get people to do what you want works only if you have power over them, doesn't produce long term change in the other person, and destroys your relationship with the other party. So, short of using force, you can't directly control another person. Two, the only behavior over which you have direct control is your own. So, how do we control our behavior? Let's take a look. We act in order to meet our needs. We change our behavior when the consequences of our actions fail to meet our needs. So, as long as our actions meet our needs, we're happy, we'll continue to act in similar ways. When our actions fail to meet our needs, we become unhappy and we become motivated to change our behavior. So, let's take a look at how it works. First, we have a goal. Let's say that goal leads to an action, and the action leads to some consequence in the world which is either consistent or inconsistent with our goal. It either meets or doesn't meet our needs. When the consequence fails to meet our needs, we're motivated to change our behavior. Let's take a look at some examples. Getting home on time. So there we are. Let's say our goal is to go home from work. So what do? We drive. Take our the route that we take to go home. And as we're driving, after we drive, we find that there's no traffic, we get home easily, and so therefore the consequence of our driving matches our needs, meets our needs, and we're okay. We continue to take that route home. However, what happens if our consequences are different? We, our goal is to go home, we act, we drive that same route, and what we find, however, is that the consequences of our actions this time fail to meet our needs. Let's say that there's road construction, so we don't get home on time. Fails to meet our needs, and so we're motivated to modify our behavior. Maybe we take the train this time because our consequences didn't meet our needs. Another example, getting a job. So let's say our goal is to get a job. This leads us to formulate an action. Perhaps we send out resumes. And then, as long as our resumes work, consequences of them are to get interviews. And as long as we're getting interviews, well, hey, that meets our needs. We'll continue to send out resumes to try to get jobs. But what happens if the consequences of our actions fail to meet our needs? So if our goal is to get a job and we do the same thing, we act and we send out our resumes. This causes a different consequence this time. Let's say that we're not getting any feedback. No one's calling us back. So that consequence fails to meet our needs. And so we are motivated to change our behavior. Maybe we'll go visit the places in person. Let's try a third example, getting a date. So there we are. We have a goal. Our goal is to get a date. We formulate an action. Perhaps we go onto the internet, make a profile, etc. And we find that when we use the internet, the consequences are we get great dates. And as long as we're getting those great dates and they're meeting our needs, we will continue to use the internet. However, what happens when our consequences of our actions fail. Our goal is to get the dates. We do the same thing. We formulate an action using the internet. However, this time, the consequences of our actions are different and we get crummy dates. Our consequences fail to meet our needs, so we may change our actions. We may join activities as a means of meeting people and change our behavior. So that's how it works to control when we control our behavior. Now, this may seem simple, but it's vitally important to understand if we're going to manage conflict with uncooperative people. To see this, let's look at the third point. You can indirectly influence another person by controlling how you respond to the other's behavior. Let's imagine that Claudia is domineering. She needs everybody to do what she wants. So she's got a goal to get you to comply. So what does she do? She acts. What does she do? She intimidates, she yells, she makes orders. And as long as the consequence of that action is that you comply, well, that meets her needs. And if that meets her needs, she's going to continue to act in an intimidating way. Now, what happens if you change your behavior in a way that stops her from meeting her needs? You can't directly control Claudia's behavior, but you can influence her behavior by changing how you act in response to her. So, as long as Claudia's actions work for her, she'll continue to repeat them. Your job: how can you change your behavior so that Claudia will be forced to adapt her behavior to you? The goal is to get you to comply, and the action is to intimidate. If the consequence of that action is you don't comply, then you fail to meet her needs. You fail to meet her goal, and now she has got to try to come up with another way to act, another way to adapt her actions to get what she wants to you. You could say, Claudia, I'm happy to talk with you, but not when you raise your voice. I'm not going to discuss this with you until you speak more respectfully. And then you have to mean it. If you change what you do, she's going to go back to her old behavior. Changing the only thing that is under your control is your own behavior. That forces the other person to adapt to you. Now, why does this work? The other person learns that she cannot meet her needs as long as she continues to behave in unwanted ways. But she can meet her needs if she adapts her behavior to your demands, to your behavior, essentially. Withholding with the other party wants is a nonviolent way to force that person to adapt to you. It is this line of thinking that underlies such nonviolent practices as strikes, Gandhi's non cooperation movement, civil disobedience, nonviolent protests. Managing conflict doesn't mean avoiding it. It's not always pleasant. It means cultivating both power and compassion. This is the power part. Thanks for watching.